Today's video, yet another edition of the TREB Resale Market Report, this time for the month of September. We're going to go through all types of numbers for the month of September that was in the Toronto/GTA real estate market. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. If you have any questions with regards to anything talked about in this video or anything discussed in previous videos, feel free to get in touch with me. As always, once again, my contact info in the description with regards to my Instagram and my Gmail and my office. Lastly, if you happen to enjoy these videos, your support in terms of a subscription is greatly appreciated, but you're not obliged to do so whatsoever. Feel free to not to subscribe, not to comment, not to like. But if you happen to like my videos and want to support, feel free to like and subscribe. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which I said on the top is the TREB Resale Market Report, where we go through the TREB Resale Market Report for the month of September. As always, we're going to start with the major numbers, then we're going to go slowly towards the more minute numbers. Timestamps, as always, in the description and on the bar below. Zip around as you please. Let's start. Starting out, total residential transactions. Now, just to be clear, if you haven't seen these videos before, these are only for resale, as is in the title. But overall, in all TREB areas, which you can pretty much think of as equivalent as the GTA, we saw a dip of 18% in total residential transactions. Year over year, of course, going from 1,100 to 9,000, as you see on the screen. Now, this is year over year once again, but if we look at month over month, and in fact go back as far as May, we see a continuous decline in number of transactions. If you've seen these videos before for the previous months, I have already established this trend. So I'm sorry if some of this is repetitive for you, but I have to stay true to the numbers, and if a trend keeps reintroducing itself through the numbers, I have to keep talking about it. But speaking of that, when we look at the preceding month, so not year over year, but August, we saw 10,378 transactions, which itself was a dip from July, where there was 11,033 transactions. And when we look at June, there was 11,106, and in May there was near 12,000 transactions. So if we are to count September as our fifth month, this is the fifth consecutive dip and decline in total residential transactions. Some of it, of course, is very much so seasonal, right? It's beginning of the school year, people are far less likely to sell. But some of it is also due to the simple fact that when May and April were so hot and there were so many properties on sale, if you were to drive down any given street, you would see about 4 for sale signs in very central areas, of course. And most of them for bidding going 100 to 150K above asking price because of the bidding nature of it. When you have such a hot market with a lot of transactions occurring, obviously the case is on the decline, on the calm down in terms of the correction, if you want to say, for a lack of a better word, you're going to see less and less transactions. That is to say, yes, some of it is seasonal, but some of it is also the fact that a lot of people already that they're selling. A lot of people already that they're buying. It will be quite fascinating for me personally to see how many transactions we'll be working with for the month of October when we do the same report for the month of October. But although we see an 18% drop in transactions, we see an 18% increase in average sold price. Once again, year over year, when we look at the average sold price across all property types in all areas, once again, TREB areas for our purposes is pretty much equivalent to the GTA. Not really, but for our practical purposes. We see an 18% increase in terms of the price, wherein we are average sold price of 1.136 million, up from September of 2020, wherein the average sold price was $960,000. So obviously last year in September we were below $1 million. Now we are above $1 million, and we have been above $1 million for many consecutive months. And not only is this up year over year, but it's also up month over month as well, wherein in August we saw an average sold price across all areas, across all property types of $1,070,000. Now, partially why transactions are down and prices are up is due to the following, wherein we see a 34% dip, at least as of September 2021, 34% dip in total new listings, going from 20,000 last year, right, to 13,000 this year. Now, why does this have anything to do with price and transactions? Well, in terms of transactions, the less listings there are, the less transactions there will be, right? Of course, that's pretty logical. But now we see that solds, so AKA transactions, make up a larger portion of total listings. That is to say, we had 9,000 total transactions, and now we're looking at 13,000 total listings, a difference of really 4 to 4,500, right? That didn't sell. That's quite a high rate of properties that sold. In other words, of all the properties that are being listed, more are actually ending up selling. And therein, this has an effect on price, because when supply is limited, and we see, a lot of sales have occurred relative to the supply, we can kind of work backwards and calculate it backwards and see, well, demand is still very strong, and it completely coheres to basic microeconomics. It's never this clean in practice, but on paper, when supply is limited and demand is strong, well, of course, prices will rise because you have a seller's market. Inventory is less and demand far exceeds what supply is. And moving towards that idea of increased demand, condominium sales are up 155% year over year. Now, this is actually a little bit misleading. If you just see 155% condominium sales are up, what's happening? Has the word got out that we're going to stop building condominiums and condominiums actually have gold in them? No, that's not what's happening. What happened was October, September, towards November, December, we saw a true dip in condo prices where it was truly a buyer's market. Not a buyer's market in the more traditional sense where we talk about in Toronto real estate, where it's actually really still a seller's market, but it's much more moderate. It's such a seller's market, Toronto real estate historically, that even if when it's moderate, people think of it as a buyer's market. Not in that sense. No, we saw with condominiums from September towards October, November, December, a dip, an actual decline in prices in a true buyer's market. And this is why this 155% is a little overinflated, because last year, once again, we saw a historical dip in condo prices and one of the true moments in Toronto real estate history where a specific property type was actually in a buyer's market and buyers had the leverage. And a lot of smart buyers that I worked with and other people worked with, a lot of smart investors jumped in around this time upwards of March, where prices started to go higher and higher and higher. Now that the general large scale numbers are out of the way, let's focus on some smaller, more minute numbers. When we look at the number of sales by property type, actually continuing on this theme of discussing condominiums, we see that all property types, both in the 905 and the 416, and obviously in total, which is a conjunction of the 905 and the 416, in all three categories, all property types are in the negatives. All sales of all property types are in the negatives, with the sole exception, as you can see, of condominiums. So once again, we can attribute this partially to the decline and the downward trend of condominiums last year. Not to say that condominiums are not really pulling their weight this year. They are, and we're going to get into more details with regards to condominiums later. But the point here is the only property type that's not in the negatives in terms of the number of sales year over year is condominiums. Detached properties, semi-detached properties, and townhomes all are down in terms of the number of transactions. And this, once again, is attributed to mostly a supply issue. In other types of viewing this, in other circumstances, when there is a 15 to 20% dip in sales of a property, in other ways of looking at it, in other circumstances, this can sometimes reflect poorly on the commodity in question that is experiencing a 15 to 20% decline in prices, or rather, in sales in this case. But that's not the case. It's not that people don't want townhomes, detached, or semis. It's that A, the prices are going higher, more and more buyers are being excluded from those property types, and B, they're scarce. They're becoming scarce, a limited supply. And one thing you can say for condominiums is that the supply relative, right, to other property types is not limited whatsoever. Now that we have looked at the number of sales by property types, now let's look at the prices by property types. And here, once again, we see yet another trend that I have been discussing, at least going back to the two antecedent videos in terms of the TREB resale market report, I think all the way back to July, and obviously in the August report as well. So once again, I apologize if this is repeat information for some of you, but it's just a trend. I have to illuminate this trend, which is, once again, we see that townhomes are the second hottest property types, not in terms of average price, because semis still outpace townhomes in terms of total price or total expense and cost, but in terms of percentage growth. Put more simply and succinctly, townhomes are ranking number 2 after detached properties in terms of pure percentage growth. And we have seen this as far back as July and August for sure. And I made this entire separate video explaining the fact that townhomes are outpacing semis and why I believe the best townhome is better than the best semi. It's going to cost you less. The rate of growth is potentially higher by most measures. I recently made that claim with regards to the one-bedroom condos versus studios, and a lot of people argued against me. So I'll be interested to see if those same people agree in terms of the semi versus townhome, wherein I would take a great townhome both for end user purposes and appreciation purposes over semis. And this is not just according to the numbers and what I see on the ground, dealing with buyers and sellers, working with buyers, buying townhomes, and working with sellers, selling townhomes. That's just my frank opinion. Let's move on to detached home prices by specific area. So starting with the TREB area in total, so the GTA, once again, we saw an average sold price for detached homes in the month of September of $1.526 million. This was a 7.2-ish% increase from the 1.423 that we saw in August. So month over month, we're not looking at year over year. So just to be clear, this accounts for a detached property selling in Mississauga and a detached property selling in King City, downtown, Durham. Is all TREB areas. Now let's just take a look at the city of Toronto, and we see a increase as well. No surprise there. Wherein the average sold price in the city of Toronto for detached house in the month of September, according to the TREB resale market report, was at 1.7, to be more specific, 1.778, a 6% increase from the $1.674 million mark that we saw in August. Now breaking it further down into Toronto Central, Toronto West, Toronto East, starting with Toronto West, we saw the only of such areas that actually showed a small decrease, very, very small decrease. I mean, marginally so. Wherein in September, the average sold price for a detached property was 1.451, down from 1.457 million in August. But Toronto Central and Toronto East conversely showed an increase, once more consistent with other areas in terms of detached properties month over month. And we saw the biggest increase in Toronto Central, wherein the average sold price for a detached property in Toronto Central is $2.7 million. Obviously, the priciest of all these areas is Toronto Central, after all. 2.7, but even at 2.7, it's a 14% increase when we compare it to August, wherein the average sold price was 2.419. And rounding out, we finished with Toronto East, which saw a increase, standing currently at 1.335, a 4% increase from the 1.278 mark that we saw in August. Now, I'm in the market with buyers right now for detached properties. One of them, we're looking in Barrie, for instance, and we didn't cover Barrie in this list, but it's in Simcoe. And another one, we're looking in Toronto, the east side of Toronto. And I'll tell you this, the amount of bidding wars that are occurring right now for detached properties is alarming. Right now, it's not rare to see 10 competing offers. And guess what? Earlier in May and April, when the market was crazily hot, at least the areas I was working with, mostly in Durham and in Richmond Hill, in the May and April area, on behalf of detached buyers, we were seeing 17 competing offers. I actually saw 17 competing offers for a property. Now we're seeing 10 to 11, which is crazy enough. They're frankly selling 150K to 200K some instances above asking price. So none of these detached prices are surprising to me the slightest. The only one that's actually surprising to me is Toronto West, where we saw pretty much the prices stay even. When it's that marginal a change, it comes down to a couple of transactions here here and there. Now let's finish the video with condo prices, wherein we take a look at downtown and the rest of Toronto. Of course, I have a lot more numbers and notes on all the other areas, but I can't include all of them in this video. One thing we see off the bat, and for this portion, I'm going to put all of it up on the screen at the same time simultaneously. When it comes down to the city of Toronto, what's definitely cooled down a bit is downtown, where in C8 and C1 we see marginal 1% increases. As I mentioned in my most recent previous video, the Toronto Real Estate Q&A, the market has not dipped in prices. Prices have increased, but as we can see, the percentage points by which prices have increased in downtown Toronto are far lower than previous and preceding months. So in that sense, it's still a seller advantageous market. Prices are still going up on paper, but it's kind of cooled down. And more specifically, that's with regards to C1, central downtown Toronto. Even though C8 showed a small increase, still a much healthier increase in price than C1. Where in C1, we're talking about 0.14% increase, nothing really we can chalk that up to pretty much prices staying even, or we can think of it in terms of 0.14 increase, right? It's once again comes down to a couple of transactions at that point. C8, once again, small increase. It's cooled down a bit, but more than C1 at 1.5% increase. And then once we look at Treb areas wide, GTA wide, and the city of Toronto, those two categories by themselves, the increase is more than downtown. In the city of Toronto, there was an increase of 3.3%, and in GTA there was an increase of 2.9%. But once again, this is not the rampant increase in prices that a lot of people were projecting for the fall and what we saw in April and May. Anyways, that's just the numbers I decided to cover in this video. There's so much more to cover, but this is a long enough video as is. If you have any further questions about any other thing, if you have any further questions about any other topic or number I did not discuss, rest assured I probably have notes on it, but I just couldn't cover it in this video. So feel free to get in touch with me via my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support is greatly appreciated, but more than anything else, the fact that you take the time out of your day to watch my videos, that is of all things the greatest compliment, more than a subscription and a like. So I really appreciate your time and viewership. Thank you. Stay safe, stay tuned.